Tonight on Bay Area Psychology, we turn our attention to the impact of learning disabilities and attention disorders on chemical dependency treatment. Many of us have fond memories of the classroom, the blackboard, the structure of knowing what was expected of us and when it was due, and a tangible grade or acknowledgement of our work. The educational system was often more clear than the more confusing world of work, parenting, and relationships. And then there are those of us who've had a different experience. In fact, 15 to 20% of children and adults across the U.S. suffer from learning disabilities. The classroom is a place of confusion, failed expectations, and a source of shame. In fact, probably the most important lesson we learned in school was that we were lazy, not trying, or stupid. Go.
My learning disabilities that I've just recently found out that I have, I believe had led to an increase in my using alcohol and drugs, the addiction. From the gate in the first grade, I flunked the first grade. I had to repeat it over. And all through school, I don't know, I didn't get it. I made D's and F's, and I carried a lot of shame. And when I couldn't keep up, I disassociated. And so I had a lot of, I dreamed a lot. And when I got to be 16 years old, I started using alcohol just to check out, just to be another person so that I could cope and be around other people. I've always had a lot of panic attacks, probably from lack of self-esteem, probably with my head, the way it works as far as always going. Not being able to filter in school as far as taking a test. If somebody's flipping a pen or something, I get distracted and I'll flunk a test. So that's...
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This awareness is particularly important to chemical dependency treatment providers because so much of traditional treatment in recovery centers is psychoeducational. In fact, most structured programs have a classroom with a whiteboard or a chalkboard, and most of the teaching is done in a lecture format, just like school. So immediately, someone with a learning disability or attention deficit disorder will be triggered back to old feelings and memories. 2, 3, 4, 5. What was school like for you growing up, Steve?
From elementary to high school, I'd say overall it was an enjoyable experience. Less the academic part. Once you get into the I got along with the kids, the rest of the guys, I enjoyed the atmosphere, but sitting in class when an English assignment came up and you're waiting, it was terrible, and that stuff was always there. Great. Once you came down to that sit-down situation, it was miserable. And when you did get called on, they usually called on you for about 2 seconds, and then they realized, forget it.
And how did that make you feel when they just would move on to somebody else?
It actually made me feel better because you knew it wasn't right, but once they did that, they don't call on you again until you get to a new teacher. Until they do that, oh well, okay. So once you get past that, you know they're not going to call on you because they know they're not going to push you. Occasionally, I would have a teacher that would give me a small passage to read, and that wasn't, and that was tough. But it was, I think that teacher may have been reaching out a little bit more than some of the other ones that would just sort of shine at.
Did you ever get a diagnosis?
I was always in what do you call it, remedial classes. Is that what you call it? I've always been in that type of class.
Okay. Do you think that may have affected your self-esteem?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah?
I'm sure it did. At more levels than I probably even realized. I know it did. Okay. I was very, just in applications and stuff. I mean, if I could bring it home, but a lot of times they'll tell you, fill it out here. And you just, no, okay, I'll be back. Yeah, right, I won't come back. Because they're going to see how long it takes me to go through the process, you're biting my tongue and trying to write this thing. Just forget it. If I couldn't bring the application home, forget it. I wouldn't go.
Thank you very much. Now, keep in mind that individuals with learning disabilities and ADD are generally of average or above average intelligence. The disability is the gap between ability and performance. It's the reason somebody very smart can't remember directions. Learning disabilities and ADD are neurological in origin. We can be born with these challenges. We can develop them as a result of prenatal injury due to drugs and alcohol or a disease. We can develop learning disabilities due to birth trauma, like difficult deliveries or head injuries. And the bottom line is that however the disability developed, we can manage it, compensate for it, and work with it. We cannot cure it. Let's take a look at some specific areas where disabilities may appear. Collecting information. For example, our input. We have difficulty with hearing and auditory misconceptions like getting sounds in the wrong sequence, or visual misconceptions, seeing perhaps or thinking was reads as saw. Touch and feel misconceptions. We have tactile defensiveness. Sometimes a gentle touch might feel too hard or unpleasant. Or maybe you have a tendency to slam doors because you aren't able to judge very well how hard that you're doing that. Now, the other issue is storing and sorting information or processing, which means that sometimes we have difficulty with attention, having difficulty knowing where to focus and filtering out our distractions or keeping our focus over time. Maybe we have problems storing information in our memory. For example, the message is only partly being stored or in the wrong sequence. Getting information out of memory, which is difficulty with word and situation recognition. We can't recall what we saw, what we heard, or what happened. Maybe we have problems organizing or problem solving. So we don't learn very well from the past, can't very well plan what to do in what order. And finally, we may have difficulty expressing information or output. For example, with our language, difficulty talking, writing, reading, or drawing, especially on demand when somebody insists that we do so. And finally, we may have difficulty with movement, which is how we use our bodies when we talk or when we use our large and small muscles, so perhaps feel clumsy at times. So what happens if I sit day in and day out misunderstanding the teacher's questions, unable to put sentences together well enough to give the answer, even though I know the answer? What if your learning disability was compounded by attention deficit disorder? Attention deficit disorder, with or without hyperactivity, is recognized and associated with at least 3 behaviors that reflect difficulty with our self-management skills. Let's take a look. We might have difficulty with attention and distractibility. So it's hard for us to keep focused. It's hard for us to do more than one thing at once. And we'd have a tendency to be sensitive to noises and sounds and sights. Maybe we have trouble with impulsivity. So we can't wait our turn very well. We have difficulty waiting in line, tend to get irritated if we have to wait for more than 10 minutes or so, and maybe even have a tendency to blurt out things because we have a hard time remembering, so if we don't say it right now, we won't remember. And finally, there's a high activity level. We have a tendency to want to move around and maybe fidget and have a hard time sitting still, particularly when there's not a lot of very interesting things going on. Not everyone with ADD has a learning disability, but for those of us who do, this can be a very painful combination. I know it was for me. I remember cheating during math class as early as the 3rd grade. That sense of panic I'd feel as the quiz was almost over and I couldn't get my addition problems and the numbers in the right columns. And I was later tested and found to have dyslexia with numbers as well as attention deficit disorder. So no wonder long division and addition problems were so stressful. So what do people do as school gets more demanding and more complicated? We can't keep up with the work. Some people learn to compensate and develop other strengths to mask their struggle. For instance, Charles Schwab, founder of the Fortune 500 company, coped with his undiagnosed dyslexia by having friends take notes, tape recording lectures, and spending longer and more focused hours in study to complete both his bachelor's and master's degrees. However, some people become depressed and anxious and begin to avoid school. Many people start self-medicating with drugs and alcohol and eventually leave the classroom altogether.
I started using drugs, pot, being the first drug that I used, when I was about 8. And it was a way of helping me cope with the shame that I was feeling. I always felt different then. The way that we handled being uncomfortable in our family is we didn't talk about it, number one. And so without being able to talk, going numb was the second best thing to do. I have dyslexia, and I'm hyperactive. I have hyperactive attention deficit disorder. And when I get overwhelmed, I get very clumsy. And being clumsy was unacceptable in my family. And so if I spilled something because I was on overwhelm, then you would hear negative remarks, about the clumsiness. And so, I'd go and use. The other thing, what we would do, because it was readily available, is do a lot of huffing, sniffing paint, sniffing glue and gas, and I did that all the time. So, as I'm trying to go to school and be a student and be able to see the paperwork and sit still in class was impossible for me. So, by the time 6th grade was happening, we'd be smoking pot all the time. I remember in 4th grade, they took me out of my regular classes so that they could make my vision go correctly. And I could remember being with retarded children and not understanding what was happening, why I wasn't with my regular peers. A good thing came out of that because they taught me how to stay linear on the page, And so now what happens is the only time that my dyslexia gets in the way for me is when I am on overwhelm. Okay.
Sadly, 80% of people incarcerated around the country are completely functionally illiterate. Of this prison population, 60 to 70% are in jail for substance abuse-related crimes. 50 to 60 of all addicts are believed to have learning disabilities or attention deficit disorders. So when you think about the numbers, we're talking about an incredibly large number of people. Someone who's arrested for a drug-related charge can be remanded to custody or may be given a chance to enter a chemical dependency treatment. Many people will choose treatment assuming that it will be easier than jail. And many of these individuals will enter treatment with a poor history of school or work performance, which the intake worker will assume is caused by addiction. What if addiction was the result of poor school performance? Now, right away, when somebody comes into treatment, they're asked to read and sign a great deal of paperwork. Rules for the program, confidentiality agreements,